Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are talking about something that I suppose, technically speaking, starts away from the game of basketball. If you aren't familiar with some of the news from some of the other sports out there, there was a pretty big story that came out recently about Kylian Mbappe, which I hope is the right way to pronounce that, but he is one of the best footballers in the world, or soccer as it's referred to as in the United States. But he is one of the premier players in the game, and it was recently announced that he was going to be transferred from his current team, which is Paris Saint-Germain, one of the most popular and recognizable football clubs in the world, basically, to Al-Hilal, which is a significantly lesser known football club and a member of the Saudi Professional League in, obviously, Saudi Arabia. So it was pretty big news for one of the premier players in a sport to be transferred from one of that sport's most recognizable clubs and teams and organizations to a squad in a country in a region of the world that doesn't receive as much attention, obviously, in the sport. And I think the big headliner and the thing that a lot of people may have seen even casually was the massive price tag that was attached to this move. Al Hilal paid, first and foremost, a transfer fee to PSG, Paris Saint Germain, of $332 million, or not sure if that was dollars or euros, but either way, 332 million, and then they will pay Mbappe himself a salary of $776 million. So by the standards of the contracts that we see in the United States for North American sports, that is absolute insanity. $776 million is more than most athletes will see over half or even all of their professional careers. And that's where it gets even crazier here, because Mbappe is being paid that insane amount of money for one season, just the one. After one season with Al Hilal, he's going to be basically back and available to sign with whoever he wants. So it was a pretty big deal. Kind of set the internet on fire for a little bit, and obviously, uh, everyone across the sort of internet space, including other professional athletes, kind of we're joking around a little bit with that insane amount of money, right? There were um, players like LeBron sort of making a statement, things like, "Hey, if they offered me that much money, I'd probably go too," and things like that. But all of that talk sort of led, at least my brain, to a little bit of a question. And that question was, could something similar to what we saw just now with Mbappe sort of play out in the basketball world as well, particularly for NBA players? Could Saudi money target NBA talent and potentially pull that talent away from the professional league here to professional leagues overseas and in Saudi Arabia in particular? So the question is, how likely is that scenario, right? There has been a lot of money sort of spent. I was going to say thrown around, but it's been targeted from various Saudi Arabian entities. Obviously, we just had Mbappe getting sort of transferred over. We've seen similar things in the worlds of professional golf, even the esports scene, professional video games, if you follow that, has seen a pretty significant influx of money from that particular region of the world. So it's a trend that's starting to develop, and the question is that a trend that could come to the basketball world as well? So, to answer that question, technically yes, but probably not, right? I know that kind of sounds like a cop out, and it is, because I can't see the future. Quite literally can't see into the future to know for sure, but it seems far less likely for this scenario to play out in the basketball world compared to what we just saw now with soccer or football. And the main reason for that, I would say, is if you look into the current position of basketball in the world, it's a little bit different, right? Football or soccer, again, is pretty much the single most popular sport in the world, on the planet. Um, and it exists on a sort of level that a sport like basketball and its fans simply cannot conceive or perceive in its totality, right? Football in some sections of the world permeates basically every single aspect of life. It's everywhere. Uh, at a point where for us, we just wouldn't necessarily be used to, right? We like to talk about the pervasiveness of ads and marketing in the United States, but for football, for soccer, it's just on a whole nother level. And basketball is definitely a sport that is growing on the global level for sure. There's no denying that. You just have to take a look at sort of the statistics for how many more people are playing and watching both the NBA and other leagues around the world. But it's still orders of magnitude smaller than football. Football is an established sort of leading sport, and it has been for a very, very long time. And more emphasis is placed on that sport than basketball. And that will not change. If it ever does, it will not change for a long, long time. But the other sort of issue here, it's not just the fact that other sports are more popular, it's the fact that in a lot of these other regions, their own regional sports leagues sort of take a little bit of a back seat still, not just to the NBA, but to the national teams of those regions, right? For a lot of these countries, their own leagues are getting started, or they've been in sort of been in action for a little while, but they don't have the same draw as the NBA, obviously. So for a lot of fans in that region, they pay less attention to the professional league locally and they pay more attention to their national team because that's where all of their best players come together to play in the Olympics, to play in FIBA competitions. So in that regard, it seems like that sort of move is unlikely because the fan base and the infrastructure for local basketball leagues professionally is not quite there yet, right? I would say that the sort of infrastructure necessary to benefit from a move like the one that we just saw in the football world with Mbappe is not quite where you would want it to be. Obviously, if a Saudi Arabian team went out and paid LeBron James $1 million to come overseas, people would watch that. You would get a benefit no matter what. But maybe not quite as big of a benefit as the move we're seeing now with a footballer being brought over into a culture that has already accepted the sport into their sort of culture, right? Into their everyday I don't want to use the word culture again, but that's kind of the only thing I can think of right now. Basketball is not quite at that level, so people would be interested, but maybe not quite to the same degree as they would for football. So that's why I think the move is a little bit less likely. However, let's play devil's advocate here, right? Let's talk about why or how a move like this might occur in the basketball world. And I kind of did allude to it just a little bit there. I said, if they pay $1 billion to LeBron James, he's going to come and he's going to play. The question is, where would he play? And the answer is, well, he'd play in the Saudi Arabian League because that does exist. The Saudi Premier League, I believe, is its name. If I was able to look it up correctly, it is the current sort of top level league in the country, and it's a league that is governed by the Saudi Arabian Basketball Federation, which is the organization that handles both the running of the league in Saudi Arabia, but they also manage the sort of national team as well. The way that we sort of talk about the USA Basketball organization, right? Not just the team, but the people who were in charge of putting that team together and getting it to international competition. That is the Saudi Arabian Basketball Federation. So they handle Saudi Arabia's participation in international events and FIBA stuff, and they partially oversee the Saudi Premier League, which has existed actually for quite some time. It was founded in 1976, and as far as I'm aware, has played continuously. I think obviously there was some discontinuation for COVID, but that happened pretty much all over the world. But they've been in existence since 1976. It currently has 12 participating teams. Interestingly enough, one of those 12 teams is the basketball division of Al-Hilal, the club that just got Mbappe to join their football program. So, there's already maybe a little bit of brand crossover there if you were looking for reasons why a similar move could be made in the basketball world. But yeah, there is a league in Saudi Arabia. The teams from that league obviously play in their own league. They also participate in what's called the FIBA Asia Champions Cup, which had its name changed like 10 or 20 years ago, but um, it is a wider tournament put together by FIBA. It features teams from the Middle East, Southeast Asia, East Asia, etc., and kind of brings together teams from multiple leagues across those regions to play in sort of a wider tournament format. So we don't really have anything sort of similar in North America, but if I had to dip back into the football world, I think it's supposed to be something similar to like UEFA or the Champions League, something like that, where it's still the professional teams. These aren't national teams playing, but it's professional teams from multiple leagues who all play up against each other. I have no idea if that analogy works or not, but that's the best that I've got. So, yeah, the Saudi Arabian basketball teams both play in their local league and have experience playing up against teams from other countries, which is certainly something that could attract attention, right? If you had an NBA player who's brought over to play for one of those teams, not only would you be increasing the profile of the Saudi Premier League, you could also potentially have that player play up against international squads as well. Although, I will say, since the Asia Champions Cup is put together by FIBA, I don't know if there are maybe national restrictions on that part, because for normal FIBA events and for the Olympics, that is kind of a thing, but I'm not really sure. The rules might be relaxed a little bit on this one because it isn't a national team competition, but it's something to think about at least if Saudi Arabian money were looking to sort of make an impact and pull an NBA player away. So there's a lot of publicity that could come into play here, and that really is the sort of biggest other point here. Depending upon what player gets recruited, even the relatively lesser known Saudi Premier League would benefit immensely from a pretty globally known name in the basketball world playing for one of their teams, right? If we're looking for examples of this, we can just sort of look to other sports. Obviously, you just have Kylian Mbappe, one of the most popular football players in the entire world, go to a Saudi Arabian team that I would say most people would have been hard pressed to know about or have heard about prior to this move. But that's not even the only example here in terms of football players. If we want another example, you can look to the recent move of another pretty damn famous name, right? Lionel Messi joined Inter Miami of the of Major League Soccer, not the Major League Soccer, Major League Soccer in the United States. And the second that he does, the value of Inter Miami as a club skyrocketed, right? The level of interest in North America for, well, what North Americans refer to as professional soccer went up, right? The interest went up because one of the best players in the game is playing in your league. So MLS generated more attention for itself in its own domestic market, but it also generated a hell of a lot of attention internationally as well. Because a guy like Messi, and by extension a guy like Mbappe, is so popular with their fans that they'll basically watch that player regardless of where they are, regardless of the level of competition around them. They want to watch their favorite player play. So we've seen it twice now in the football world, right? With Messi, with Mbappe. Um, I mean, you go even further back, guys like I think Beckham came and played for the LA Galaxy for a little bit. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, I think pretty much made the same move. I think he played for the same team too. But that's been going on in the football world for quite a while. Top talent has been sort of pulled away from Europe and brought to MLS for the sake of sort of driving up interest. So it's perfectly reasonable to expect that countries in other regions of the world who have the means, like Saudi Arabia obviously does because they have near infinite money, to do something similar, to go out and get a big name just to get eyes on their own product. And obviously, as I said before, football is significantly bigger across the world than basketball, but the same principle would apply, right? Um, but with that in mind, we talk about the value for that NBA player, right? I said if they paid LeBron $1 billion multiple times earlier on in the video, the fact of the matter is they wouldn't necessarily need to pay near that amount, right? If an NBA player was going to be pulled away from the NBA to go play in the Saudi Premier League or anywhere really, any other league around the world, um, the contract that they would be given would be significantly smaller than what we saw for Kylian Mbappe. Right, football is massively larger and more important in that region, or really any region other than North America, compared to basketball. So I don't think that an NBA player would get paid $776 million. It is fair to say, though, that any offer given to that player would almost certainly blow the annual salaries of NBA players out of the water, right? I mean, just insane amounts of money. We just talked about yesterday the extension for Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics. That is the richest contract in the history of the NBA, and it's going to pay out $300 million over 5 years. Whereas Mbappe is going to get paid more than double that amount for a single season. So, an NBA player would make way more than any other player in the league, but would not make nearly as much as one of the best footballers on the face of the planet. But does that matter? Because if it's still significantly more money than an NBA contract would offer in terms of annual value, it could still pull someone away. And a player who's recruited in that fashion wouldn't even necessarily have to give up their career in the NBA for too long. To get into sort of the nitty gritty of the Mbappe deal, there were rumors that he was headed to Real Madrid, another obviously very prominent football club, and that he would be heading there potentially in 2024. And many people would think, now that he's been transferred over to Al-Hilal, that maybe that will no longer be possible, but that's not the case. His contract with Al-Hilal is for just the singular season, so once he's played that out, collected his $776 million, Mbappe could still end up going to the team he was planning to go to anyway once his current contract expired. So something similar could play out for an NBA star, right? A player could be paid for effectively one season, right? You take one season off from the NBA, you go play in the Saudi Premier League, and then a year later you return to the NBA with significantly more money in your pockets. So all of that is to say that this move is possible, right? Um, the ecosystem for basketball in a lot of places in the world, but maybe the Middle East specifically, since that is kind of the example here, it is growing, but it's not even remotely close to that of football, right? That makes a move like this in the basketball world a little bit less likely, but nowhere near impossible, right? If Saudi Arabia were looking to get eyes on their own basketball sort of their own program, if they were looking to infuse cash and attention to the Saudi Premier League, then this is exactly the kind of move that would make that happen, because we've seen repeatedly across the world the same move being made. Attract top talent, one big guy who can sort of draw eyes to your version of the sport and potentially sort of drive up interest a little bit, right? There's no guarantees that that works, and obviously there have been some bad examples of leagues and regions who pay a lot of money to get a big name and then it doesn't really pan out. But if you're Saudi Arabia, you have the money to spend. But that leads me to one sort of final conclusion here. If no move comes, if they're not going to sort of throw $1 billion at LeBron James or something like that, there are alternatives for Saudi interests. Saudi money could still make itself known in the NBA in other ways, right? Potential ownership groups, arena sponsorships, or even just a straight up direct partnership with the NBA itself. That is another aspect that we have seen from people, organizations, or even just the Saudi Arabian government itself. They have spent a lot of money to get themselves involved in not just sports, but various enterprises. I mentioned earlier on in the video, even like esports is something that they've sort of interested themselves in. So it doesn't have to be confrontational. It doesn't have to be that Saudi Arabian money comes in and pulls talent away from the NBA. It could be that that money gets infused into the NBA so that Saudi Arabian interests sort of start making money back on the sport and grow interest that way. Something maybe a little bit slower and a little bit more organic, I guess, let's say, right? Because if they're putting money into the NBA, then obviously they're also going to be putting money into marketing the NBA to the people of their own country, rather than just going and paying, a LeBron or a Steph Curry to come play in a Saudi Arabian city for a year. So, yeah, like I said before, my answer is a little bit of a cop out. I think a move where a player gets directly plucked and then taken to a Saudi Arabian team in the Premier League is incredibly unlikely, but it is possible. And if that move doesn't happen, then it's extremely likely that Saudi Arabian money just makes its way into the basketball world in other ways. So, is it a concern? No, I don't really think so. Not right now. I don't think we're going to see a Kylian Mbappe situation in the NBA anytime soon. But it was just something worth thinking about, because the amount of money that was being mentioned for the Mbappe deal just went beyond comprehension. When I saw the announcement, I had to sort of reread it multiple times just to make sure that that wasn't a typo. So anytime that degree of money gets thrown around, you start to think about it a little bit. You start to ask some questions. But as I said, for the NBA, I don't really think that there's any sort of imminent move like that coming. But who knows? Maybe there will be a more concerted push for basketball to grow at an accelerated rate in Saudi Arabia in particular, and maybe the Middle East in general. But yeah, just my two thoughts on that. Just, I don't know, a little bit of research into the Mbappe situation and what basketball looks like professionally in Saudi Arabia. But other than that, please feel free to let me know what you think in terms of whether you think this is a likely move to happen or not, whether you think it would be good for the league and for Saudi Arabian interest in basketball. Obviously, it would be good for whatever player gets handed, like $500 million. But yeah, just a little, let's call it a thought experiment for today. But that is all I had to say on the subject. So once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.